Father, we are grateful for this opportunity to bow before your holy and majestic throne and lay our petitions before thee. And we are thankful for Christ and his work, and his blood, and our redemption, and our adoption into your family that allows us this opportunity to pray. Father, we pray for those, especially now that have been mentioned, that are hurting, they're ill at home, or recovering at home from procedures. Especially we pray for those who lost loved ones, such as Kay Downey, who lost her sister. We pray for her family and their comfort. Be with those of our number, Father, that are out of town or traveling. We pray for their safety. Father, we pray that you'll go with us through our study, and especially during our worship the next hour, that we'll do so in the Spirit and in truth. Forgive us of our sins and deliver us from temptation. We ask all these things in Christ. Okay, we're in Luke chapter 19. We looked last week at a couple of parables, but we finished up with the parable of the talents there in Matthew 25. And there's a parable, we mentioned this last week in our study. And by the way, this looks to be our 24th parable, I think, so far. Beginning today. But we want to continue our study of what we're calling stewardship parables, although really, as I said when we began the study, some of these parables can be classified in more than one category. We're calling this parable of pounds stewardship parable, but it could have been classified as a kingdom parable for that matter. Or for instance, you could even also classify the talents and the pounds, perhaps do a parable regarding preparedness. But nevertheless, we're calling this a stewardship parable. And we mentioned before we looked at the parable of the talents last week that these parables, the talents and the pounds, are very similar, prompting some commentators to say that they were just perhaps different versions of the same parable, and yet that doesn't seem to be the case to me because they're told on two different occasions and two different contexts. Yeah, they're similar, but they also emphasize some different things. And certainly the parable of the talents was told in that context of what? Well, Matthew 25, 24, in the context of what? Yeah, I mean, it's in the context of the Olivet Discourse, in which he first discusses the destruction of Jerusalem for about the first 34 or 35 verses in Matthew 24, which the premillennialists have never understood, and I guess never will. And then he talks about his actual second coming in the rest of Matthew 24, which is followed up by several parables dealing with preparedness for that coming. And you start with the virgins, and the idea is you're to be ready. And the parable of the talents then says, well, what are you doing then while you're waiting? While you're ready? Well, you're to be active. You're to be busy in the Lord's service. But that discourse on the Mount of Olives was amongst a small group of the Lord's disciples. So a different context from what we see here in Luke chapter 19. Jesus has passed through Jericho, and we remember the incident, one of your favorite probably childhood incidents or from Vacation Bible School. You got the wee little man in the sycamore tree, Zacchaeus. And so he is actually speaking then to a larger audience and actually speaking before he enters Jerusalem. In the parable of the talents, all of that discourse is during the week of his crucifixion, around Tuesday of that week. He's already entered. He's already had the triumphal entry. Here, this is before he enters the city. Verse 11, now as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought, and here's our reason for the parable, They thought that the kingdom of God would appear immediately. Now, there's no question that the Jews in Jesus' day, most of them totally misunderstood, even his own disciples, or what would be his apostles, misunderstood the nature of his kingdom. They were looking for, a physical ruler to overthrow the Roman government, the physical authorities, and reestablish that prosperous Davidic Solomon kingdom there from Jerusalem, and reign with splendor and put down their enemies and all that kind of thing. And Jesus made it pretty clear over and over again that that's not what he came for. His kingdom was a spiritual kingdom. His kingdom was about overcoming the enemy of sin. Even he told Pilate there at the end, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight. There in John chapter 6, they wanted to take him by force and make him king. That's not what he wanted. He could have done that, but that's not what he came for. And they never understood that, or at least didn't at that point. The disciples did. Actually, the apostles didn't even understand it the day he was taken from them and ascended into heaven. They were, will you establish the kingdom now? Will you wait in Jerusalem and we'll figure it out? It's going to be revealed to you. And so it's a response to this thinking of the immediate appearing of the kingdom. So he says, a certain nobleman, a man of noble birth, went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. So he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas. I think the King James says pounds, but that particular monetary amount is about 3 months' wages or so, $18 to $20 in our money, and said to them, do business till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants, for whom he had given the money, to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. He said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in very little, have authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. Then another came, saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. And of course, we've heard this before, right, from the parable of the talents. And there we see some similarities. For I feared you, because you are an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit, reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit, reaping what I did not sow. And again, in both of these parables, the man here not accepting this guy's evaluation of him, but simply saying, look, if that's what you really thought of me, then what should that have motivated you to do? Why then did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who had 10 minas. But they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. You going to give him another? For I say to you that to everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me. Now, the interesting thing about this parable is it is the one parable that we're going to study that at least it appears that Jesus took a modern, he would take things true to life in parables and make spiritual applications. But here he takes an event, an actual event in history, it appears, that is extremely fresh on these people's minds, and then builds this parable from it. And the event is this. During the, you recall, Herod was king of Judea, Herod the Great, around the time of Jesus' birth. But he died shortly thereafter, around 4 BC. And he left some sons that you read about later in the New Testament, Antipas and Archelaus. And it was thought that Antipas would receive the kingdom, and yet in his will, Herod left the kingdom to his son Archelaus. Well, what happened was, during the Passover feast of 4 BC, the deal was Archelaus' kingship had to be approved by Rome. In this case, Augustus, who I believe was still alive at this point. So he had to travel to Rome to be approved by Caesar. But before that happened, there was a uprising during the Passover feast, and a minor disturbance, it's termed, and it degenerated into a bloodbath on the part of Archelaus' soldiers, and they killed some 3,000 Jews. And then at that point, Archelaus said, look, Passover feast is over, and the rest of you can go home. As you can imagine, that didn't sit well with the Jewish population. So he goes to Rome, and now he has to defend his actions to Caesar before he can be approved as the new king of Judea. And 50 Jewish deputies are sent as an ambassage to Rome to plead with Caesar not to appoint Archelaus. You can't stand him, they hate him. We don't want him to reign as king, he's not qualified. And we would prefer our independence, but if you're going to put anybody over us, we want it to be a Roman governor, which is, of course, eventually what happened. As you know, by the time of Jesus' death, he was put to death by what? The Roman governor. But at this point, they don't want Archelaus, and not only did these 50 were sent from Judea, but there were some 8,000 Jews living in Rome that also supported their position. Caesar took a few days and decided he was going to go ahead and appoint Archelaus as ethnarch of Idumea, Judea, and Samaria, and promised to make him a king if he proved himself. And you know, Antipas got Galilee and Perea. Well, he spent some time. I mean, these things, you understand, during that time, it's not like this all happened in a couple of weeks. I mean, you know, you travel to Rome, you're there for months, maybe a year, I don't know. You're there for a while. He has to defend himself against a couple of lawsuits there. But he finally goes home, and when he does, and there's no evidence that he put the 50 deputies to death, but he does remove the high priest, the Jewish high priest, because he felt he supported his enemies. And then from that point on, he's pretty brutal to the Jews and the Samaritans, at least for a couple of years. And finally, he's removed by Caesar in AD 6 and banished because of his incompetence and his brutality. Governors were appointed. So from that point on, Judea, Samaria, Idumea are under Roman governors. You recall, of course, when Joseph fled to Egypt, he was warned of God by the Holy Spirit to flee to Egypt with the child of Jesus, because who reigned in the place of his father? Archelaus at the time, around this time. And so, a very brutal person, and they couldn't stand him. And in fact, so this parable pretty much mirrors what happened in history, and would, of course, hit home with these people. Now, as we've said before in parables, we're looking for the main point, and any subpoints that correspond to that. You can't take every detail. It's not an allegory. Obviously, Jesus is the man of noble birth in this parable, and he's not an Archelaus. So it's a little bit different in that regard, obviously. You can't take every point and apply it. But certainly Christ is the nobleman, well-born, a man of noble birth, according to that Greek word. The far country in which he travels into is what? Where? Earth. He's already on earth. Heaven, yeah, sure. He's crucified, and he goes to heaven because it's in heaven where he receives his what? What did he receive when he went to heaven? According to Daniel. His kingdom, sure. His kingdom. And so he travels, he goes to heaven, he goes to a far country, he says. Having received the kingdom, he returns. So when he returns, what's he going to do? Judgment, right? Judgment. It's time for judgment. But while he's gone, he calls his 10 servants and commits unto them these minas, one each, worth 3 months' wage. And what are they going to do with that? What are they supposed to do with that? Now, in the story of Archelaus, of course, the Jews couldn't stand Archelaus. But that was true for Jesus as well. By and large, the Jews rejected him, right? They said, we'll not have this man reign over us. He didn't come to be the kind of king we wanted. Therefore, the vast majority of them rejected. And certainly, for the first 10 years of the history of the church, of Jesus' kingdom, it was composed of Jews until the time of Cornelius. And yet, in the end, the number of Gentiles that accepted the gospel far outseated the Jews. And so we see this hatred of the Jews. He receives this kingdom in the far country, which is heaven, not while he's on earth. And then he comes again to judge. So what can we learn? What are some of the lessons we learn from this parable? You remember the parable of the talents? You recall he gave differing amounts of money, right? He gave according to their ability. 5 and then 2 and 1, whatever. But it's interesting in this parable that he gives everybody the same amount, right? But when he calls them to account, notice one came back and said, look, I've made 10. Now, we don't have the account of all 10 of them. We've got an abbreviated story, right? I mean, there was 10 servants. We don't have the accounts. We have the account of 2 who made something and 1 that didn't. We can assume that the others then probably made some differing amounts. This is the only one that we see that's condemned. But one makes 10 and the other one makes 5. So what does that tell me? Did he come down on the fellow that only had 5? Well, why didn't he make 10? I gave you the same amount as him. No. So what does that tell me? Sure. He doesn't demand the same thing from everybody. He still looks at abilities and opportunities. And we mentioned that in the parable of the talents.
He does expect you to work.
But he does expect our best.
Yes.
Absolutely. But my best may not be your best. My wife teaches school. She'd tell you that there are students in the class that are very smart. There are students in the class that aren't so smart. And it's not because they don't try. It's not because maybe they wouldn't want to study or do their work. They're just not smart people. And so we do have different abilities. And not only do we have different abilities, but we have different opportunities as well. And so God only expects us to do what we can do, not what other people can do. He's not requiring of us. But I find another interesting thing in this account about what they were given. This fellow took his mina and he made 10. And he said, you've been faithful in very little. Now have authority over what? 10 cities. So, what was this fellow's reward?
More responsibility.
More work, more responsibility, right? He didn't say, okay, it's vacation time. Yeah.
Another concept that's commensurate with ability and opportunity is access. Not everybody has access.
Yeah, I mean, I would liken that, I guess. I mean, whatever terms we want to use, I would liken that to maybe opportunity, access, opportunity, whatever. You may live in a community or part of the world where you don't have the same opportunity that I do as far as reaching people with the gospel. Yeah.
I guess they're first cousins. I see it distinct different, but I think you're first cousins. And maybe that has a lot to do with my upbringing, I suppose,
Yeah.
and my environment.
Sure.
There's opportunities.
Oh, no
for
doubt,
everybody,
yeah.
but not everybody has the access.
That's right.
And I'm
Right.
not gonna get any deeper into that. Just-
But I'll buy that. I'll buy that they're first cousins. Access and opportunity. But it's interesting to me, I mean, let's think about this for a minute. The actor in Hollywood gets the small part. What's he trying to prove? If he does well with the small part, what's he going to get? He's going to get the big role, right? That's what he wants. He wants the big role. The surgeon, just fresh out of medical school, he longs for the day when he sharpens his skills and he gets what? That's true for some of them. Well, let's try to be above it. Let's think positive thoughts. Absolutely. He longs for the day when he gets the more challenging operations. When people call him to say, hey, when other doctors call him and say, look, we got this over here, we got this difficult case, can you come in and consult on that? Maybe perform the surgery. That's what he's looking for. The guy who's making his way up the corporate ladder. And I know this is a misconception, you know. But there are some people that think that the guy who works, what do they call it out there?
Yes.
The guy that sorts packages, people have this idea of working harder than the guy who's vice president of a particular party. No, it's not. Well, usually those people are the ones that work about 20 hours a day to get where they got. They put in the time and the effort to get more responsibility, which requires them to work more. I mean, the guy who's punching the clock, he comes in, he punches the clock. Yeah, he works hard while he's there, but then he punches the clock and he goes home and he forgets about it. He has no more responsibility. I know there are people here in this congregation that have managerial responsibilities in different companies, and you know what they get when they're on their free time? Phone calls to deal with stuff at work. Right? You punch out working the conveyor belt, you're done for the day. Nobody's going to call you and ask you about a package running down the conveyor belt. But you work for that. You work hard in order to get greater responsibility. And it is a compliment. I mean, coaches expect more out of their best athletes. They train them harder and expect more from them than they do a guy who's got limited ability. You know, when it comes time for those competitive national achievement tests, schools don't put their worst students in there, right? They put the best. Here's your opportunity. And so the higher we rise, even in this world, the heavier our workload and responsibility. We're given greater challenges. This gives us an opportunity to meet those challenges and prove our ability, and it gives us confidence and self-worth. It's the same thing with the Lord's Word. He says here, he says, look, you've proven yourself over these things, I'll put you over this other. I don't know how that works in heaven, but it was interesting what they got for their effort was more responsibility.
It stands to reason, Greg, that the folks who are trying harder, getting more responsibility, they want to achieve that. Whereas you see the folks who really don't want the responsibility are not going to make the effort anyway. Therefore, they're not going to accomplish it.
Well, that's right. Some people are just trying to fly under the radar.
Yeah.
Don't give me any more work. I don't want any more. Yeah, and I don't, you know, everybody's got their own concepts, worldly concepts of heaven. I don't know where to get those. If a person loves golf, what is heaven going to be? I'm going to be golfing. That's kind of the deal. If heaven, you know, if I like this on earth, that's what heaven's going to be like. all the pictures we have of heaven, it's going to be great. But it looks like there's going to be service, things to be done. God's a God of activity. He's not lazy. Right? And you expect his people to be lazy either. Remember the last parable of the talents, he said, you wicked and what? Lazy servant. Sloth. We got a sloth, a new sloth out here in Memphis too. I asked my wife, I said, I wonder how long it took that sloth to be born. That's a joke. Sloth movie. But we're not sloths. We're not to be lazy. Notice, of course, he says here at the end of the parable, we're not going to go back into that discussion which we talked about in the parable of the talents about the character of the nobleman, but notice it's the same. It is the same point that we did make in the parable of the talents about the old, don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. We see that here too. Even from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me. And most commentators see perhaps even a twofold parallel here in this passage. Bring the enemies that rejected me before me to slay them. Certainly, God took out his wrath on the Jewish people for rejecting his son in what year? AD 70. When the Jewish Commonwealth was destroyed by, Vespasian began it. When he became Emperor, Titus, his son, finished it. But the Jewish nation was judged in AD 70 by God for their rejection, in large part, of Christ. And certainly then, but we see ultimately in this fulfillment here of the judgment day when he comes back to judge his servants or to reward his servants, whatever the case may be. Any questions or comments? Very similar to the talents, but a little bit different. They're kind of quiet. All right. Well, let's look at one more, what we're going to call stewardship parable. Next week, we're going to look at one of the most famous parables of all. We're going to answer that burning question. What was so good about that Good Samaritan? We'll look at that next week. Let's look at Luke chapter 12, the rich fool. Now, Luke 12 is an interesting, the whole context is interesting because it doesn't appear in this chapter as Jesus is teaching the people that he intended to go this direction with his discussion. But he was rudely interrupted by a fellow, and it took him in this direction. But notice if you begin, he's talking about some pretty important things at the beginning of Luke 12 about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees there and about the proper reverence and respect and fear of God there in verses 4 through 6. About confessing him before men there beginning in about verse 8. So some pretty important, actually pretty deep and important spiritual concepts he's trying to impart to these people. And then he gets this rude interruption. One from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance." Now that's real nice on this guy's part. And so what that ends up doing then is we get this special discourse all because of this rude fellow interrupting the Lord. We get this special discourse on the danger of materialism and worldliness right here because of what this fellow did. But he said to him, verse 14, and notice, by the way, how he ends up this chapter, and that's where this parable is going. Look in verse 33. Sell what you have and give alms. Provide yourselves with money bags which do not grow old, a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's where this discussion is going. That's where this parable is going. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. But he responds to this fellow, man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Jesus came here for a purpose. Now, there's no question. He's the ultimate judge, and I guess he could have. He had the authority to do anything. He's the Son of God, but that's not his purpose. He makes it clear here, this is not what I came for. Besides, there are civil judges and rulers in place for this kind of thing. It's not my job. And besides that, the old law was pretty clear on what these people got, right? If a person had sons, who got what? Oldest son got the double portion, and then everybody else, all the rest of them, no matter whether it was 1, 2, 3 more, whatever, got the rest. Okay? So, oldest son gets double. So, it's in black and white. This is not difficult to see. What's this man's problem? He said to them, and Jesus points out his problem right here in verse 15. He said to them, a very stern warning, perhaps one of the clearest warnings we have in Scripture, take heed and beware of what? Covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Well, what is covetousness? What does that mean? What is the word covetousness
Something
mean?
somebody else has got.
Hmm?
Want something somebody else has got.
Okay, yeah. Selfish ambition to get more, never satisfied. It's usually defined as greed or avarice, an excessive or inordinate desire for gain. That is, you're just obsessed. More and more and more. And sometimes it's idolatry. Sometimes it can just be over gain in general, or it can be over, you can be covetous over a specific item. Remember the old law says, don't covet your what? Your neighbor's wife, whatever. Servants. Don't covet anything he has. So it's this inordinate desire for gain. Yes? Yeah, they did, what is it called? Paper, head of the family, yeah. I mean, that's not what it's for here. Yeah, culture, family culture was a little bit different back then. But yeah, he did become the head of the clan, that's true. But notice he gives the warning, and then he gives the reason, right? No guesswork here. Take heed and beware of covetousness. There's the warning. Why? Why? Your life doesn't what? Doesn't consist in the abundance of the things you possess. That's not what life is anyway. That's not what life's about. That's not what your life consists of. So he gives the warning, and he gives the reason. And then he does more than that. What does he do? He gives you a warning, he gives you a reason, and then what? And then he gives you an example. He gives you an illustration. So we get this parable of the rich fool. And he spoke a parable of them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? Well, that's not true. So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns. So that's, he already had barns. And build greater. And there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. This guy's getting his soul confused with physical. For many years. Now listen to this. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Now that was a popular expression of Greekism. Eat, drink, and be merry. It's interesting, though, that this fellow leaves off part of the phrase. The actual Epicurean phrase was, eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die. That's the actual phrase. Look, tomorrow, we're here today, we're gone tomorrow. Let's live it up today. The dying part was not in this guy's plan, right? I'm just going to eat, drink, and be merry, but I'm not worried about the dying part. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? Somebody read that from the King James American. Anybody got an American Standard Version?
God said to him, thou foolish one, this night is thy soul required of thee, and the things which thou hast prepared, who shall live in?
Yeah, and there's a footnote in there, the ASB on that. You got the footnote?
Yeah,
What does it say
or,
for that verse?
it says life to the soul.
Does it have the word, does it render the latter part of that portion of that sentence, they shall require your soul of you?
Yeah.
Okay. In the ASB footnote, it says it can be rendered, they shall require your soul of you, indicating possibly that the text is saying these very things that you want so bad, right? Very things that you want, that you've put so much stock into, that you've worked so obsessively for, those very things are going to be your downfall, your undoing. That's why your soul is being required of you. And so, it's a simple discussion of worldliness. And you know, it's pretty easy for us when it comes to sin in our day and age. You know, we can look frown upon drunkenness and dishonesty and fornication. But you know, covetousness and worldliness is a little bit harder to spot and deal with. Right?
Greed falls in
The
there.
church probably pervades a little more than we would like for it to, right? And it's not necessarily that it has to be things that are sinful in and of themselves, but anytime we put an inordinate amount of time and resources into something of this world where it takes away from the time that we should be spending in spiritual matters, then we've got an idolatry problem, don't we? 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17 says what? Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life, not of the Father, but of the world. You know, they're passing away, and he that does the lust thereof, but what? So, it's a love for the world, it's a love for things. So, God calls this man a fool. So why does he call him a fool? Let's look at some things that he forgot. First of all, he forgot what? Let's come back to that. Who else did he forget?
He forgot how he had been blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. He forgot the source of his blessings, of his real happiness, if you will. I mean, he had a false conception of life, right? Eating and drinking is life. Things are life. And he forgot where those things came from.
Self-centered, look at the eyes.
Yeah, and look, when he gets down to it, really one of the first things he did, he forgot about other people. He kept saying I. 6 times he uses, I think, personal pronouns,
Then
please.
mine, then mine.
I and mine. Everything's I, my. Actually, 6 times he uses the word I, 5 times he uses the word my. Not one time did he remember anybody else. And of course, commentators will point out over and over again, I mean, he had barns. So if he had more than he could fill his own barns, what could he have done with that stuff?
Give it to his neighbor.
Yeah, he could have filled somebody else's barns. I mean, there were people out there, needy people, and they could have used it. Didn't cross his mind. It was all about him. And then, of course, he forgot that, again, we're more than what we own. And that was the point of the parable that Jesus started out with. Your life doesn't consist in the abundance of the things that you possess. And even in the church, you know, Jesus said on one occasion how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. He didn't say it was impossible. But he goes on to Timothy and talks about those who trust, or in another parallel passage, those who trust in riches in the gospel accounts. And yet, even in the church, sometimes we tend to think of people that are prosperous physically as being a little above everybody else. We have that same thought. We look at people a little different, they have a little more. But go over to 1 Timothy chapter 6. There's probably more discussion in 1 Timothy 6 about possessions than any other than here in the New Testament. First Timothy 6. Now, we'll start out in look at verse 6. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money, I say money, but the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. That's parallel to those who trust in riches, Jesus said. For which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
Also, coveted is in that verse also, which while some coveted after.
Yeah. Look down at verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust. Don't trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. The point is, it's not sinful to be rich. I think of a lot of men in the Bible that were reproved of God that were rich. Abraham was rich. Job was rich. David and Solomon were rich. A lot of rich people that were approved by God in the Bible, but the difference is they didn't trust, as the Bible says, in uncertain riches, here today, gone tomorrow. They put their trust in there. They understood their life did not consist in the abundance of the things they possessed. They understood that life was more than what they had. And number two, they were willing to do what with what they had? Share it. They gave it to God, and they gave it to other people. And so, difference in attitude, not so much in how much you have, but your attitude toward it. Add your priorities in order. That's right. That verse there that talks about you didn't bring anything in, you don't want to carry anything out, reminds me of that little verse, use your money while you're living, do not hoard it to be proud, for you cannot take it with you. There are no pockets in the shroud. And as you've heard before too, you don't see any U-Haul trailers behind the hearse either. So, read, we'll pick up here next week and we're almost through with this parable, but read Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 3 through 10. Look what Solomon taught. He tried it all, had it all. Look at the conclusion he came to. We'll finish this up and then talk about that Good Samaritan.